almost to a gallon. This final quarter be a gallon. Now it's not including everything else that's water-based like my tea. Tears and tears. 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 The conversation. What's the difference between tears and tears? The word tears meaning levels, and the word tears meaning what comes from your eyes. The conversation you having with yourself. Peace, 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 peace. The conversation that you have with yourself is one of the most important things that we get into. This week in the God Hour podcast, we got just into that. We got into it versus the crossfader. The transition based on what we apply and how we apply it. We got into the fade and fill aspect. Playing the background to the shadow while filling the space with everything that feeds the anchors to our shadow instead of getting to the root. Getting to our roots is getting past discomfort. Getting past our roots. Oh shit, I didn't mean to do all that, but getting past the root is to assess our roots. We got to get past that space of discomfort. We got to get past comfort. When we're looking at ourselves and coming into that space, one thing that I had to realize, I talked about it in the podcast, was I would get to the point of acknowledgement. Good day, good day. I would get to the point of acknowledgement. I would even get to the point of acceptance. But the thing that I had a problem with was the apology or the forgiveness, the apology and the forgiveness. It didn't matter whatever I acknowledged. It didn't matter what I acknowledged. It didn't matter what I accepted until I came to that realm of that apology. That means apologizing to myself for not knowing, apologizing to ourselves for not knowing, apologize to ourselves for leaving my shadow in that space. The apology based on so I can actually start applying. This is where I was talking about that tears and that tears. Sound the same, but it's two different words. Tears represents the aspects of the levels, and tears represents that cleansing process. As you're assessing yourself, coming into this space, that conversation you have with yourself reflects in your space. I'm going to pull some cards in a little bit. That conversation you having with yourself reflects in your space. Is your conversation about people, i.e. the manifestation of emotions? Is it about the events, the long-standing aspects of those emotions? Or is it about the solution? If I'm having conversations about problems, or I'm having that self-talk and talking about my problems, that means I'm acknowledging my problems. I'm accepting that my problems are there, but I'm not assessing my problems to create the solution, to create that solution for myself, or learn the solution in assessing, reflecting, being accountable, taking myself in that responsibility past the point of comfort and becoming real uncomfortable with myself. Then in my space, that's what I will always see. Remember, it's the unseen that creates our space. So if I'm having conversations, and a lot of my conversations externally, the external arguments that I'm always having are always about people, then that means I'm at the level where it's time for me to assess my emotions. It's my accountability, my responsibility to assess my emotions. Not sit there and get stuck in, I'm listening and dealing with people. This person did this, that person did this, that person did this shit. You can't believe what they did. Then as I shift up, now I'm talking about the events. I'm not going to that party. I'm not going to that event because that person's going to be there or that emotion is going to be there. And I ain't got time because they're going to disrespect me. So now I'm talking about the problem is my capstone. The reason I'm not going there is because of the problem. That's going to be the problem. The person is the problem. This is where we get into this aspect with ourselves of when we're stuck in that material and that physical, we get stuck on what something did, does, or is done. We get stuck in what is did, what has been done, and what it's doing or what it does. That's how we look at the aspects. I talked about it in the podcast as well. When you look at, I saw it based in a video. When you look at a BMW or you look at a Mercedes or you look at the Bentley truck or whatever it may be, whatever vehicle, the Highline vehicle, do you like that vehicle based on what it is or what it does? Do you like that vehicle based on what it is or what it does? There's a difference between this. A lot of times we keep coming into these spaces, relationships, friendships, the job, the events that are happening in our lives, and we're looking at what they do and not looking at what it is. We're looking at it and we'll say what they're doing is trying to distract us, but we don't tap into what this distraction is and what it can teach me, what it really can teach me about myself. Remember, if it bothers you and it triggers you, it's something that you got to really go deal with. Something that you really got to go sit down with and talk to yourself about. Instead of you always worried about what it does. I remember a long time for myself, I was worried about what it did. I was worried about what it does. I was worried about what it was doing. I was always stuck in the doing aspect. I was always stuck in the what I'm doing, what I've done, what I've did. I was always in that sense of that past tense. Instead of me looking at the space for what it is. What is it bringing? What is it cultivating in my space? How is it working in my space? What is the why to why this is in my space? Why does this always seem to be a constant aspect in my space? That will require me to take accountability in creating a solution. That would keep you in that space of I need to take some accountability, and I'm responsible for myself to create a solution. It's time for me to invest into the changes if I don't like the way that looks or I don't like the way that is in my life. So now that's the apology. It went all the way back to the apology. I can acknowledge it all day. You can accept it all day to a certain point. But if I'm not apologizing, then what I accept is going to be based in conditions. What I acknowledge is going to be based upon the necessity of those conditions. Say that one more time. Rising. If I don't come to the level of apology, that means investing in the changes of my behavior, taking accountability and responsibility, then what I accept is based on conditions, and what I acknowledge is based on the necessity to maintain those conditions, to maintain that struggle complex, to maintain that I've been hurt, to maintain that I'm existing inside my trauma. So I keep bringing my traumas to the light. And we talked about this Friday during the lecture. The only thing in the light is based on perception, projection, and preservation. So everything in the light that gets triggered when I'm getting triggered in the light is going to be based on what am I trying to preserve, what is this projection coming from, and what is about my perception. I have to acknowledge those things. I have to accept those things. And I got to apologize to myself so I can now step into my darkness or step into that shadow. Because in my shadow, we come to understand that in my shadow is potential, and the darkness is all potential. And the darkness is the root of all your rooting and understanding and changing your perspective and coming into my true purpose. So now I got to look at my conversations differently. How does this conversation help me assess my perspective? Is this conversation worth me assessing, will it really help me assess my perspective? Will it really help me reach into my potential? Is it comfortable or is it uncomfortable? And will it lead me towards my purpose? All in that conversation with myself. What am I avoiding? I'll see it in the space. If I'm avoiding something in my shadow, you avoid something in your shadows, you avoid something in your shadows, then what is needed to preserve to keep you in comfort will be in your space. How you react to it is based in that perception. No one has a problem with your greeting. No one has a problem with your greeting. But as we go into this space with ourselves, this is a part of that assessing. What am I trying to preserve? The deeper that we go inside ourselves, especially when we go into this healing aspect, I know that now I'm trying to preserve my peace. So now my perception must change based on my perception changes based on my perspective of what I find as being as peace. The deeper that I go into more layers that I remove, the more and more I come having them conversations. When I'm breaking down like your mantras, your affirmations, setting your intentions, whatever comes up is the thing that have to be dealt with in that space. It's working for you. Remember, everything works for you. But if you're only used to seeing it one way based on that old projection, old perspective of what you're trying to preserve, there's nothing I'm trying to preserve in that state. I know that state is based on an older aspect of me, or an aspect of me I've not assessed. That's why it keeps coming up to the surface. But every time that I'm trying to preserve something in this current state, the behavior, my habits, my patterns, I'm trying to maintain those because I can get something from them just if I work a little bit harder. I thought it's supposed to be working smarter and not harder. Your work is making you, your work makes you more efficient, because the more you get into that, now you in your mental. Now you in that mentality with yourself, changing that mental. Now your mentality is changed. The more you start assessing your mentality, the more efficient you go into these spaces, Grand Rising. The more you start assessing these aspects, the more efficient you become in your movements. That's when everybody wants to be greetings. That's when everybody wants to say, ooh, I'm an empath, and I got my psychic abilities, and I got my clairvoyances, and I got my clairambience, and I got my gifts is online. I can now project and astral project and all that. Don't matter if the root is still rooted in the people or the emotions. It doesn't matter if my shit is still rooted in the events that are created based on those emotions, and I'm not looking for solutions. I'm still concentrating on the problem, so now I'm trying to avoid the problem. So now, yeah, I can go over here and I can do this and I can meditate for a couple, but what is it doing for me? What conversation am I having with myself? The things that come up, how am I assessing them? Or am I avoiding them because, see, that's more negative shit coming in my space, so now I'm going to cut everybody away. It's time to apologize. You keep having that same conversation that keeps creating the same events that keep giving you the same problems. Even though the face changed, even though the event changed, it's always based in the same energy. It's always based in the same position, because you're basing it in preservation. You're trying to preserve what you have not yet assessed. So all you can do is project and keep the same perception based on the surface level. You can tell when you start going within yourself, because you feel the release. You feel the necessary aspect of, okay, cool, I'm stepping into my potential. My potential is outside of my comfort zone. My perspective is being challenged to take me outside of my comfort zone. My purpose is outside of my comfort zone. The only thing inside of my comfort zone is old perceptions, old projections, and old things that are no longer worthy of being preserved based on the level of my energy where I'm at. Yeah. This is you shifting into your truth of yourself. This week in the God Hour podcast, we got deeper into that aspects. We got deeper into the aspects of fade and fill, or the two extremes of emotional numbness and emotional manipulation. Everybody has used emotional manipulation. Everybody. When it comes to us being honest with ourselves, we have to be honest to ourselves and acknowledge our truths. Everybody has literally used a form or forms of emotional manipulation. The more that you avoid learning your emotions or staying emotionally numb, and now the perception outside of you is to keep you preserving that behavior, that hatred, that whatever it is deep down inside, you will use emotional manipulation because that's the only way that you can exist within that space on the lowest level. There's a higher level of emotional manipulation, and that's your magic. That's the ritual. That's the science behind the magic and the magnetism. So, yes, you have and you always will use emotional manipulation. But you got to take it out of this space down here. See, when we start assessing these shadows and the identities and the anchors to these shadows, you start seeing that emotional manipulation, it wasn't bad, it wasn't good. It was positive or it was negative. It was negative to you because it was negative to you because it didn't serve you, but that didn't make it positive for anybody else that was involved based on what they were dealing with. So it was still in a positive sense. But you're trying to make it negative when it was positive. Because if you go back to it, I've talked about this before, it's like going back to when you were 3, when you were 1 or 2 years old. I can go back to when I was before I became 1 year old, and I can remember when I was being breastfed. That was a very positive thing for me in order to grow and learn myself. And how I used to grow myself. But I can't go back now at the age where I'm at now and go back and say, hey mom, let me get some titty milk. It's no longer, just because it's no longer beneficial to me now doesn't make it any less positive. That's how we got to start looking at things when you're assessing these aspects, especially assessing your shadows. Your negatives, just because they seem negative or the events happened that was negative, doesn't mean that it cannot serve you in the learning process. The things that were positive, that served you a purpose, are no longer serving you a process, they're no longer serving that process. Now it's time to look at it like, oh wait, it served me a purpose based on where I was at, based on what was being preserved inside of that space. Now it's time for me to assess and let go. This is one of the bottom line keys when it comes into your shadow work. Or else you're just going to be dubbing over what we talked about in the podcast. You're just going to keep dubbing over. Every relationship that you get in remind you of the first relationship that you ever got in. The first relationship that ever came towards you. You get stuck in that space because it's time to make that apology. You've acknowledged that your mother was the problem. You've acknowledged that your mother figure, father figure, uncle, grandmother, past life cycle, people that are irritating you. You acknowledge that they irritate you. You accept that they irritate you, but you can't apologize because you like, why would I apologize? They ain't going to accept it. They ain't going to say nothing. So now your acceptance in your space is based on conditions, and then your acknowledgement or your level of applying is based on necessity to stay safe. Remember, to access your roots, to access the roots and the anchors, you must go past the point of comfort. To access your roots, To access, reflect, learn the aspects of your roots, you must go past the point of comfort. That means you gotta go past the point of where it served you. Go past the point of where it served you and go into the point of where it didn't serve you. You gotta go past it, and if the comfort in that root, remember, comfort is just based in reaction. Comfort is just based in reaction. So if I know how to react to it, if I know how to react to certain people, I know how to react to certain events in order to keep myself moving in that space, I was in comfort. No matter how uncomfortable it looked in the human space. But as long as I was able to sit inside of that space and I knew how to react, I knew how to protest, I knew how to march, I knew how to manipulate the situation, I was in comfort. It's when I couldn't any longer say something, I couldn't say anything that would affect it. So now I started projecting based on avoidance and neglect. A lot of these things we got into deep into the podcast. We got deep into the aspects of neglect and the correspondence to neglect wounds, the correspondence to the avoidance wounds. We got real deep into those this week in the podcast. But I desire you to be the fucking best. I desire you to be the fucking best. What are you learning? How are you learning? Are you only assessing people? When you're having conversations, is it always about people? Is it always about the event? Or are you talking about the solution? Okay, if I'm always worried about people, I'm always going to be focused on problems. If I'm looking at the events, therefore, I'm always going to be building events based on problems, to escape problems, to the event to always escape the problem. Therefore, when it comes time to have that conversation about solutions, all my solutions, the only thing I can actually put in my space is talk about more problems. It's time to remove that capstone. It's time to assess the capstone to all of your conversations. It's time to understand that those tiers are going to help you with those tiers. It's time to start having that conversation with yourself. I desire you to be the fucking best, of course. Tune into the G.O.D podcast. The links are all over the page right now. If you're interested within services from readings or mini consults all the way to the shadow work consultation based in for the therapy and everything else, hit me up in the inbox or hit me up in the DMs and be the fucking best. That's all I got left. Be the fucking best. I love you. We love us. Ashe.